So good morning everyone and welcome to our Climate and Water Update webinar for summer 2019-20. For those joining us for the first time, welcome, and for anyone who's joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Today we will be discussing recent climate conditions over spring, also the summer outlooks for temperature, rainfall and stream flow. My name is Claire and I'll be your moderator today. I'm also joined by Ange, who will be producing today's webinar. Hi Ange.
Hi Claire.
Today we will help make the webinar as interactive as possible. Before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items. Our broadcast today will be run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Most importantly, please note the chat box where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters. Please use this, not the Q&A box, to send your questions to us during the session, and we will answer as many as possible during the allotted breaks. So if you'd like to test out the chat box now, feel free to tell us your name and where you're dialing in from. In response to feedback received from previous webinars, here is some information on how to participate in our polls. When a poll is in motion, attendees will see a set of questions to the right of their webinar screen. Please select your answer choice, followed by the submit button below them. I will also take this moment to thank those of you who sent in questions during your registration process. We've used them quite specifically to help us develop the content of this session in accordance with the common themes of those questions. So thank you for engaging with us. And finally, I am delighted to introduce you to our presenters, Catherine Ganter and Jonathan Pollock. Hi Catherine, hi Jonathan.
Hi Claire.
G'day Claire.
Catherine and Jonathan both work in the climate prediction team at the Bureau. Their experience lies in seasonal outlooks and climate. Catherine's main focus is reporting on and communicating the current state of the main climate drivers for Australia, as well as the monthly and seasonal rainfall and temperature outlooks. Jonathan joined the Bureau as a weather observer, collecting and recording meteorological data for climate, forecasting and aviation purposes. Later, he moved into climate information services, turning data into useful information for agriculture, emergency services and general public users. So welcome everybody. Catherine, would you like to tell us what we'll be hearing about today?
Sure. So taking a look at what's on the cards today, we're starting off with a wrap-up of spring conditions, which will help give us an overall view of the landscape leading into the warmer months. Then we'll take a look at the outlook for summer, and then finish off with the likely influences or drivers behind these outlooks.
Thanks, Catherine. So we'd actually like to start our webinar today with a poll. We're interested in hearing from you which information is most used by your business. A, outlooks, B, current climate drivers, C, recent conditions, or D, all of the above, or E, something we haven't thought of. If it's something else, please tell us in the chat. We had so the poll has been launched. You should be able to see it on the right hand of your screen. So click a response and submit.
Yes, don't forget the submit button, otherwise it won't actually come through. And we did get some feedback on our last webinar that the poll screen was not to the centre of the webinar screen. It definitely should be. It should be over to the right. So hopefully you can find it there and you can get your responses in. Did we want to maybe take a question while we wait for a few more responses to come in via the poll?
Thanks, Ange. We've got 200 participants online and we've had quite a few people tell us in the chat that they're online from several states around Australia, which is great to see. So Jonathan, we had a question during registration. Someone was asking us about the climate outlook for next year. So how far ahead can you go?
Well, our seasonal outlooks go out to about 4 months ahead now, so well into next year, and later on in the presentation, we're going to show you what we're expecting in terms of rainfall and temperature at the start of 2020. But that's about as far out as we can go with detailed maps. But sometimes we can provide general guidance about what the broader or what the large-scale climate drivers are doing, and that can give us some hints as to what overall patterns might be like further ahead again. But really, that's about 4 months that we can provide that detailed outlook.
Thank you. And someone else asked us for dates of specific rain events. So how far ahead can we go on that?
Well, all the seasonal outlooks or the climate outlooks, they'll provide information about the likely conditions over a certain period. So they're not for individual days like the 7-day weather forecast is.
That's cool. We had quite a few questions about the wet season, and we did run a special wet season outlook webinar just 2 weeks ago. So if anyone's particularly interested in tropical Australia, if you go to our bom.gov.au/webinars page, you should be able to access the recording. We went into that in quite a lot of detail, but I think we will cover it briefly today.
That's again, we're going to be talking about some of those same themes today.
Yeah, fantastic. And there was one other question. Someone was asking for Murray-Darling Basin specific information. So if they really want to narrow it down, can they do that?
There will be a little bit of Murray-Darling stuff in today. Given how dry things are, we're aware that many people are looking out for the region.
Okay, fantastic. Well, most of you have responded to the poll, so we thank you very much for engaging with us. Please continue to do so, and I'll just share those results with us. So hopefully everyone can see them now. So let's have a little look-see at our end. It looks like the majority, so 47% of respondents answered all of the above. So indeed, we're interested in everything. A couple of no answers. Hopefully to those of you who didn't participate in the poll, it wasn't because you didn't know how, so please let us know if you're still having trouble with that, and we'll make sure to help you before the next poll. We did have a couple of people also respond in the chat, so answer choice D for other, probability and severity of extremes, particularly heat waves. That came in from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so
Al McDonald is in agriculture. He's also, he or she, interested in strong winds, evaporation, and drought-breaking rains. Any rainfall would be good at this point, eh?
So we hope that our presenters can help us today. So we'll be covering the first section.
That will be me. Okay, so here are the rainfall deciles for spring. So you'll see quite a lot of red here on the map. The palest red shows areas in the bottom 30% of recorded rainfall. The mid-red is the bottom 10%, and that darkest red is lowest on record. It was the driest spring in 120 years of records for Australia. And if we look at the states, Western Australia came in with its driest spring on record, South Australia 3rd, Queensland 4th, New South Wales and the Northern 6th, and the Northern Territory 8th. And the Murray-Darling Basin region, the region came in at 7th driest. So for those of you interested in climate drivers, it's likely that some of this dry is from the strong positive Indian Ocean dipole that's still currently present, and potentially a bit from a negative southern annular mode, or SAM. And Jonathan will speak a bit about these later. This dry spring unfortunately means that for the year to date, for the months of January to November, they're the second driest for the 11-month period, and that's second only to 1902. So let's look at daytime temperatures now. The spring maximum temperature deciles are shown here on the map, and it's pretty orangey. That yellow palest colour there, it shows areas in the top 30% of recorded maximum temperatures. The mid-orange is the top 10%, and the darkest is highest on record. So for Australia as a whole, we had the second warmest spring in 110 years. And the focus of this warmth was most intense in Western Australia, with the state having its warmest spring on record by a large margin. So for area averages, it was about half a degree above its previous record, which is a lot. The remaining states ranked in their top 10 warmest springs, except for Tasmania and Victoria, but they were still in the top third of rankings. And what about 2019 overall? Daytime temperatures for January to November were warmest on record for Australia. And if we take a look at likely scenarios, we'd expect 2019 as a whole to probably be among the 5 warmest on record. There's actually a climate update on 2019 so far, and I've put that as a link at the bottom of this page here if you want to take a closer look. So let's look at minimum temperatures for spring, and it's generally a bit of a different situation. We saw cooler nights across much of the east and north, and warmer than average nights in much of Western Australia. And for those in Victoria and Tasmania who felt chilly, while our rankings were somewhere in the middle, it was the coldest spring nights for Victoria since 2003 and Tasmania since 2006. So it has been a long time since they've been this cool. So if we take a look at root zone soil moisture, so what I mean by this is our top metre of the soil profile, and the end of spring puts us with below average soil moisture in many key agricultural areas for November, so those pinky red areas. We had some rainfall in early November, and that's injected some moisture into those eastern inland areas, so that's why they look a bit different. Now, before I show you our water storages, I wanted to show you a longer term rainfall map. So this one is April 2017 to November 2019, so almost 3 years. And it shows there's been a lack of rainfall for many areas in both the south and the north. And we can see the Murray-Darling Basin in particular here is very dry. It's a pretty serious looking map. So onto our storage levels, and just to walk you through these plots on the right, they show the water storage levels since late 2009 for the northern up top and the southern Murray-Darling Basin at the bottom. The last peak in the top plot for the northern Murray-Darling Basin is in early 2017. And part of the reason I showed you the slide just before. So unfortunately, we can see we haven't had any significant relief yet for these regions. And the Murray-Darling Basin in the north is particularly low at 6.4%. So many areas don't have usable storages. Many towns in the region have raised their water restriction levels and are investigating alternative water supplies such as groundwater to augment their water supply during this period of time. In the south, storages are a lot more variable, but generally the ones in Victoria are in somewhat better shape, but those are mainly the smaller storages, unfortunately. So let's just take a look at the shorter 3-year graphs for the rest of the country, and I'll highlight them so you know what I'm looking at. But the majority of the storages are below 50 to 60%. So looking at the northern basins here, we can see that the white line on their graph has generally been downwards, with the Pilbara Gascoyne on the far left there, has not had significant inflows for almost 3 years. So they'll really be looking for some rainfall this summer. So if we look at the more southern basins, on the left we have the southwest coast and South Australian Gulf, and they're generally lower than last year, but not particularly so. Tasmania and southeast coast Victoria on the right there are the anomalies for the country, They've seen small increases during their fielding season, so we can see compared to last year they've risen slightly, so it's that red line. And that's potentially aided to some degree by the more average rainfall and cooler conditions at times across the region there. And lastly, the southeast coast of New South Wales, so one of the very populous areas. And similar to the Murray-Darling Basin, we can see a steady fall over the last 3 years. And they're now below 50% storages.
Nicole asked, you said, is it true Murray-Darling Basin's 7th driest spring on record?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So we saw some high temperatures in November. So this plot here isn't our standard one. It shows areas where the highest daily maximum temperature in November was over 40 degrees. So all the coloured areas here hit 40 at some point in November, and that's in fact over 80% of Australia. So it was a pretty warm month.
So we haven't even hit summer and they've already banged out a 40-degree day.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, more than 10 degrees normal than you would expect for a...
You know, I didn't look at how far above normal it was.
Sounds pretty hot to me.
Although we did get many stations with their highest November day on record, and that included stations across the south of the south of WA and up north, and along the South Australia coast, and also in those white areas in the southeast, so in eastern Tasmania, eastern Victoria, southeast New South Wales. So all these ones that had records are actually include many longer term rainfall sites. So I mean well over 50 years of data. So we did have some unusually early warm temperatures.
I'm not sure if you looked at this, but Sam Webster's asking, would it be possible to get these maps in relation to humidity?
Oh, not sure. I know evaporation exists, but I don't know about humidity.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, Sam. We'll have to see what we can do on that one.
Yep. And so with all the bushfires across Australia, we can have a look at the Forest Fire Danger Index during spring to see just how unusual the conditions are. So for those unfamiliar, the Forest Fire Danger Index was developed in the 1960s to measure the degree of fire danger of Australian forests. So the index combines a record of dryness based on rainfall and evaporation, and combines it with wind speed, temperature and humidity. The one thing it does not look at is fuel loads. So the deep orange colour here that we have on the plot shows areas that have had their highest spring FFDI values on record, which is consistent with much of the fire activity we've seen so far. So it's a pretty serious looking map. And basically, to sum up, spring, we've seen that dry conditions have generally continued along with these warmer than average days, and much of the landscape is unfortunately dry. It's not a great situation to head up into summer, unfortunately.
Thank you. I think that's it. Right, cool. I just wanted to see the comments from Sam Webster again. Ange, thank you. So Sam saw your FFDI map and he said that's exactly the reason I wanted to know humidity levels, because it's critical for fire weather. So you showed it to him in the FFDI, so that's fantastic.
Excellent.
Miss L. McDonald said evaporation would be great, please. I don't think we've got it in this one, but we do soil moisture, which is same but different. Let's go on our second poll now, please, Ange.
Thank you, Claire. So our question this time round is, what climate information do you most need for summer? So our answer choices are A for rainfall, B for temperature, C for heat wave, D for water storage, or E other. Now, if it is other, please tell us in the chat what your thoughts are there. So we'll leave that open for a few more moments. If anyone is having difficulties with the poll, just a gentle reminder, it should be there on the right of your screen. Please select your answer choice and submit. Very important to click submit. Claire, do you want to take a question while we wait a few more moments for these answer choices to come through?
Yes, please. Do we have any in the chat? Otherwise, I'll check our registration. By the way, I'd like a gelati index, please. How many gelatis I'll need to buy my kids this holiday. Robin asked, are there plans to move to the Macarthur Forest Fire Index? From the Macarthur Forest Fire Index to an index based on Project Vesta. That sounds like a bushfire weather type specialist question.
Yeah, I don't have any information on that, Claire, but I guess someone in the Bureau might. We could ask around.
Yeah, I think I can't help you with that, sorry. Let me go to our registration question. Somebody asked us about forecasts on consecutive hot days in capital cities relative to last summer. We've got a heat wave forecast, right, for forecasts of hot days?
That's right, but there is a heat wave surface. So if there is a hot spell that qualifies as a heat wave, we do send out warnings for that.
Thank you. And someone specifically, probably from Adelaide, was asking about maximum temperature anomalies for Adelaide and asked when might the temperature hit 50 degrees in Adelaide. I guess they had a hot one in November. That's a big number, that 50 number.
Seems to be a question that gets asked quite often when the capital cities are likely to hit 50. Unfortunately, we can't forecast it, but we would hope that we'd get a good notice in the 7-day weather forecast, because what tends to happen with temperature extremes, they often tend to be a lot more forecastable. So if we're likely to see high temperatures, they often show themselves early.
Yeah, and it was that record hot days that we had in November that broke community records. How's our poll going, Ange?
Absolutely. All right. Well, the vast majority of you have answered now, so we thank you for engaging with us once again. And I can see that, well, rainfall is definitely the most popular answer choice here at 43%. Unsurprising, I guess. And we did have a few responses come back for heatwave also, and also in our chat box regarding other.
David's asking us about the IOD. I'm glad you asked us, David. That is part of our presentation. You'll just have to hang in a bit longer to hear about it. So our next section is actually going to be on the outlook, but we'll just close our poll and see how we went with our poll results.
Absolutely. Let's share these first, and then we can move on to the next stage of the presentation. So where are we? Here we go. So yeah, 44% with rainfall, unsurprisingly. And some of you didn't engage with us again. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you are having any issues with using the poll, please drop me a line in the chat and I'll be glad to provide you with some more assistance if I can. So, summer outlook. Who's taking us through that, Jonathan?
Thanks, Ange. Yeah, I'll talk to that one. This slide has two maps showing the chance of above average rainfall. Areas with a lower chance of above average rainfall have the yellow to brown shading, and areas with a higher chance have the green to blue shading. And areas that are shaded white, they have roughly equal chance of above or below average rainfall. Now, the map on the left is for December, and you can see that most of the country has low chances of above average rainfall. So it's a drier than normal outlook for most parts. The exception is northern and Western Australia, where chances range from close to 50% to above 70% in the far west. The map on the right is the 3-month outlook for summer. So that's the 3 months of December, January and February. And you can see that the dry pattern has contracted to the east compared to the 1-month outlook for December. And we'll explain why that pattern is changing when we talk about our climate drivers later on. Now, at the same time, the areas likely to have above average rainfall have expanded over northern and Western Australia. So for summer, we're likely to see a below average rainfall in the east above average rainfall in the northwest, and there's no strong indication towards above or below average rainfall for most of central and southwestern Australia. Now this slide has two maps showing the chance of above average temperatures. So areas with a higher chance of above average temperatures are shaded pink or red, and areas shaded white or beige have roughly equal chances of above or below average temperatures. Both of the maps are for summer, so the 3 months of December, January and February. The map on the left is for maximum temperatures, and the map on the right is for minimum temperatures. You can see that overall, both maps are very red. For most of the country, the chance of above average maximum and minimum temperatures is greater than 80%. That's quite high. So what the maps are showing us is that most of Australia is very likely to have warmer than normal days and nights this summer, and the exceptions are parts of Tasmania and Victoria.
So drier than normal and hotter than normal in short for the summer, yeah?
That's right. In the east, it's likely to stay drier than usual, and across most of the country, we're likely to see higher than average temperatures. Now, on this slide, we've got the stream flow outlook. Now, the next stream flow forecast is due out next Tuesday on the 10th of December, but the current outlook for November to January shows low stream flows are most likely across over 90% of sites in Australia. And that's due to those preceding dry and warm conditions. And so far, that's what we've observed. We've seen low flows at about 90% of locations in November. That's the highest number of low stream flows at different sites across Australia in at least a decade. Now, I'll pass back over to Catherine, and she's going to explain what that temperature and rainfall outlook means for the likelihood of different types of severe weather occurring this summer.
Thanks, Jonathan. So the current bushfire outlook map is here on the right, and unlike the observed forest fire danger index map that we saw, the outlook takes into account fuel loads. So across the eastern coast and parts of the south, we see the red colour, which is above normal fire potential. And what we've seen in many of the drought regions is that poor vegetation growth has meant fuel loads are reduced. So that's why many of these drought regions are not showing up with above normal fire potential. So in addition to increased likelihood of bushfire activity for many areas, heat waves are also more likely this summer. And with the general dryness of the forecast and the drier soils, it means widespread flooding is less likely, but that's not to say there won't be localised flash flooding from, you know, the monsoonal heavy rains. Some of you may have tuned into the wet season webinar the other week, and the chain of events that shift the monsoon into the southern hemisphere is actually well behind schedule, and that's in part tied in with the positive Indian Ocean dipole. And what we can see is that the monsoon is likely to be late in arriving this year. And also those wet season webinar folks would have also heard that the number of tropical cyclones is likely to be lower than usual. So our long-term average for Australia is 11, but it's worth noting that since 2000 our average has been about 9 or 10. And lastly, with this drier forecast, our rainfall deficiencies that are current are unfortunately unlikely to budge during the summer months, and also means dust still present in hot and windy conditions.
It's like a long hot summer to me. Ben McTavish was asking specifically if there's any indication of likely windy periods, because that affects their operations. Do we have any information on that?
No, there's nothing we're presenting today that really tells us what winds are going to be like. But certainly we do have wind information on the forecast.
And I think that we know it's been a bit stronger than normal because of negative sand, is that correct? Am I making
That is correct for many areas, although places like the East Coast, the wind has been reduced due to less onshore flow.
Okay, so it depends where you live. Thank you. We've got a heap of great questions coming through. We'll get through as many as we can. What should we jump to? Wendy Cox is asking, what sort of collaboration does BOM do with emergency services? I know that we often have embedded meteorologists in our state control centres, so they work very much hand in glove, particularly in the fire weather situations.
That's exactly the description I was going to use, Claire. Yeah, there's an intimate relationship between weather forecasting and emergency services.
Yeah. And we do also discuss the climate conditions in the months leading up to the severe weather season as well.
So, work very closely. Thank you. Matt Goddard says, we've seen wind generation capacity factors in Victoria and South Australia much higher than usual in November, December. Well, that's a good sign of windiness, isn't it? Is this a function of the climate conditions IOD stand during westerlies?
I'd say it's more likely to be that negative SAM.
Yeah, we'll look at the southern annular mode soon, and we'll see how it's a shift in the position of the average winds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ben McTavish is asking us about cyclones. Has the severity of those cyclones been increasing?
Well, that's what some data is pointing towards. We're seeing fewer cyclones in the region, but perhaps more intense ones.
Thank you. Peter and Lika, in the Melbourne area last year, there was a pattern of build-up to one or at the most 2 consecutive very hot days, followed by a change and milder conditions. That's very Melbourne, isn't it? Our good old Four Seasons type weather pattern. And those very strong winds, hoping this happened in our Lockyer Corner. What was driving the pattern last year, and how likely do we have a repeat this year? Great question. I think the answer is probably coming in our climate drivers, but can we have an early answer?
Well, this year has been a bit unusual in terms of the strength of the positive Indian Ocean dipole. It's not something we've seen an event like this for quite some time. So we do have sort of different broad scale factors compared to where we were this time last year.
Aaron Perez asking, is this the first time you've seen this sort of weather cycle?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is referring to. A lot of the patterns we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about the Indian Ocean dipole and the southern annular mode. They're natural phenomena that do occur, and we certainly we've seen those events before.
And the reality is, though, that the long-term warming trend is adding to these forecasts.
Thank you. Sam's asked us quite a few questions about bushfire weather and suggested a webinar in future, so we'll put that down on our ideas list as something we might be able to do in future. Shall we continue with our climate drivers now?
Thanks, Claire. So you've heard us talk about a positive Indian Ocean dipole today, and it really is one of the sort of the key climate drivers at the moment for Australia, and it partly explains the recent conditions and the outlooks. Now, the Indian Ocean dipole is sustained changes in the difference between sea surface temperature anomalies in the west and the east of the tropical Indian Ocean. Currently, we've got a positive Indian Ocean dipole with warmer than usual sea surface temperatures around the Horn of Africa in the west and cooler than normal water off Sumatra in the east. During a positive Indian Ocean dipole, the focus of convection, which gives us our cloudiness and rainfall, shifts away from Australia, and often we have a drier and warmer winter and spring. Now, usually, an Indian Ocean dipole event will break down at the end of spring when the monsoon trough moves into the southern hemisphere. But this event, this particular positive Indian Ocean dipole, has been so strong that the models expect it will take longer than usual to break down. And the chart we're looking at now on the slide illustrates that story. So the horizontal axis shows the months of the year, and the vertical axis shows if the Indian Ocean dipole is positive, that's the pink area at the top of the chart, neutral, that's the white area in the middle, or negative, the blue area at the bottom. Now, the thick black line shows the observed monthly values of the Indian Ocean Dipole Index back to June. And you can see it hovered around that positive Indian Ocean Dipole threshold in July. That's the dashed pink line. and then it started increasing for the next 3 months, almost up to sort of +2 degrees at the very top of the chart. Now, the Indian Ocean Dipole Index doesn't normally get that high, even in sort of past positive Indian Ocean dipole events. So this is a particularly strong event, and it's comparable to other strong events we've seen since the 60s. Now, the dashed black line are the current month's values of the Indian Ocean Dipole Index. And then looking ahead, we've got those wispy grey lines. They're all the different forecasts the model has generated. And the solid green line in the middle of those is the average of all those forecasts. And what that plot shows you is that it's likely that the sea surface temperatures in the tropical Indian Ocean will be more neutral in February next year. Now, another driver in play at the moment is the southern annular mode, and it's in its negative phase. What that means is the belt of westerly winds to the south of the mainland is shifted further north than usual. And what that typically does at this time of year is reduce the moist onshore flow to parts of the southeast, and it leads to sort of below average rainfall in those areas. And it can also lead to warmer temperatures for the southeast in spring and summer. So the dry signal that we're seeing in the outlook, we're getting part of that from the positive Indian Ocean, but it's also being reinforced by this signal from the southern annular mode. Now, the latest forecast for the southern annular mode shows that it's probably going to remain in its negative phase throughout December. The other big climate driver for Australia is the El Niño Southern Oscillation out in the Pacific, and it's been neutral this year and it's likely to remain so heading into 2020. So it hasn't been pushing us towards wetter or drier conditions and isn't likely to soon either.
And that's holding back the monsoon in part, is that right?
That's right. That really strong Indian Ocean dipole is one of the reasons why we've seen such a delay in the monsoon trough shifting into the southern hemisphere.
It's a bit of a battle.
It is. So the monsoon might be running late this year.
That's right.
So will that affect the cyclone season as well?
Well, it's likely to affect the start of, it's likely to mean a delayed monsoon onset, so a later monsoon date than usual, and it probably means a longer build-up period, sort of a later start to the wet season rains in Darwin, and probably a slower start to the beginning of the cyclone season, but it doesn't mean much for the back half of the wet season, if you like. It doesn't mean that it's going to be sort of a drier or less eventful second part of the wet season.
Yeah, longer build-up, yeah. We're getting some fantastic questions. Now's your time, everyone. Send them in. We'll get through as many as we can. So Robin asked us, is the IOD independent of the El Niño? Could we have positive IOD and an El Niño at the same time?
So there's a lot of discussion around the IOD and the El Niño Southern Oscillation, and they often occur together, but they can occur separately like they have this year. Oh goodness, where's the question gone to see the second half, sorry?
Sorry, she was asking can you have positive IOD and El Niño at the same time?
You definitely can, and the last time we had that happen was in 2015. And what tends to happen when we have both of these dry climate drivers together is they often amplify and broaden the drying effect.
Double whammy, right?
Yeah.
It can happen, but it's not happening at the moment. We've got one, but not the other one.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is that we have, Helen was mentioning that we have lots of educational material on all of this type of information on our website on Indian Ocean Dipole and El Niño and
That's right.
heaps of other good stuff.
There's some fantastic videos on there explaining all the drivers.
That would be helpful too, thank you. Roger asked if the prediction is for 35% of above average. If we were looking for 200 millimetres, does that mean you'll only get 130 millimetres?
Well, we've got an excellent tool that can answer those questions more directly. So rather than just looking at those maps for chance of above median rainfall, if you go to our Climate Outlook's website, we have a product called Chance of At Least, where users can pick their own threshold, their own rainfall amount, and see what the chance of receiving that amount is across the fortnights, month and the seasons. Yeah. So if you want to know what your odds are of getting 200 mils of summer in Australia, definitely worth going to the website.
I don't think the equation is quite like that, Roger, but you're on the right path.
So what the outlook that we're showing, 35% chance of the rainfall for the season as a whole being above average. So it basically means we have a 65% chance of the rainfall being below average as a whole.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. So let's go back to some of our earlier questions. So Tristan was asking us, what effect do you believe the recent heavy rainfall snowfall, we had snow in Victoria at the start of December, just destroying one of everything. How will that affect our stream flows?
We've had this question asked during the winter, and I know the answer to it, I just don't remember the why. And generally, snowfalls don't have a big impact on stream flows, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it was in our drought webinar earlier in July, so that recording's online, and I think Matt from Water told us that not a lot of the snowfall actually gets into the catchments in the Murray-Darling Basin.
And it can sublimate as well, rather than just sort of evaporate before it actually turns into water and runs off.
Yeah. What does that mean, the sublimate? Oh, thank you. Nicole asked us a particularly tricky question. How many times have Australian cities hit 50 degrees? Have we?
So I saw this question earlier, so I made sure I pulled out our extreme stats.
Oh, that's right. She's onto it.
And in terms of our official records, we have 2 sites that have hit 50, and one of them has hit 50 twice. So Oodnadatta in South Australia and Mardi in WA. So they're quite remote areas. And Oodnadatta, that occurred in 1960, and Mardi in 1998.
So it has happened, but not in a capital city as yet.
Correct.
Thank you. Cheryl Vanner has her own forecasting system. She says, my observation and rule of thumb is temperatures increment by about 1 degree per week. So she's expecting Adelaide will experience more 38 degrees. So 48 degrees. We will check our climate stats and see how we go with that, Cheryl. Melinda asked, do all record-breaking years like high heat, low rainfall also have positive IOD and SAM present? Great question.
That's a great question, yeah. We had a look at this, I think it was in the wet season webinar. If we have a look at rainfall totals for every year and sort of rank them from lowest to highest, and then if we sort of colour code them or classify them in terms of what our drivers were doing, you do see a trend for lower rainfall during positive Indian Ocean dipole and El Nino years, but it's not a guarantee. And likewise, you tend to have more rainfall or above average rainfall in La Nina years and negative Indian Ocean dipoles, but again, it's not a guarantee. But typically, that's how it sort of shifts the odds towards wetter or drier.
So, rough rule of thumb, positive IOD is drier and El Nino is drier, and the flip is the flip, yeah?
That's right.
Thank you. Mark asked, is it possible to do 12-month projections on IOD?
The short answer is no, unfortunately.
I think it's normally a 3 to 6 month cycle, and this one's kind of dragging out longer because it's been stronger than we've ever seen, yeah?
Yeah, it sort of, the pattern started appearing in May, but it wasn't quite over the usual monitoring regions until about July. So we've pretty much had this pattern for most of winter and spring and this start of summer.
Yeah, well, the models sort of would have trouble looking that far ahead. It should be said they've done a remarkable job on this event, because very early on they were telling us that they expected a positive Indian Ocean dipole event, and they expected a very, very strong one.
Interesting. Mark's actually asked, does climate change affect the strength frequency of the IOD, El Nino or SAM?
That's a great question. Yeah,
I know we have our State of the Climate document that was done only a year ago that documents changes in temperature and rainfall, but I'm not sure it went down to drivers as such.
In terms of SAM, we do see a trend towards positive SAM, and that's partly, there is definitely a trend in SAM. It's harder to know about the others. The IOD has had relatively less research done on it, so I don't know how much research into climate change has occurred on it. And what was the last? It was El Nino, wasn't it?
It's pretty much all the drivers that IOD, SAM and El Nino, yeah.
They do know certain things about El Nino, and I believe it's more in the rainfall response that your rainfall effect is likely to be more intense. But as for frequency and position, I believe that's a lot harder to work out.
Thank you. Sam's asking us, can we see a repeat of this year's weather in next year's weather in 2020? We talked about it's a bit hard to go a whole year ahead, right? But do you have any ideas about that?
Well, moving into 2020, at the start of 2020, we expect that positive Indian Ocean dipole will break down. It doesn't look like the El Nino, well, it looks like the El Nino Southern Oscillation is staying neutral for now. So we should be starting off with fairly neutral drivers at the beginning or in the first quarter of next year. So hopefully after that, what happens next, we're not really sure at this stage, but hopefully it's an improvement on this year.
Thank you. Stephen Tucker is asking about forecasting the wind speed at 1,500 metres because it affects bushfire behaviour, but I think that's quite specialist information. Probably the meteorologist in the State Control Centre would.
We do have.
Yeah?
That's right. We have wind forecasts for different layers of the atmosphere, not just the surface, but up to higher levels as well.
Thank you. Bridie's asking, can you predict evaporation rates for rainfall events to determine how much would be infiltrated or runoff?
I don't know of anybody doing that, but it's a great idea.
I'm not sure if we forecast for it. I don't think there's an evaporation forecast.
I'm not aware of that. I know we do have evaporation data on our web, our water site. Yeah, we get evaporation maps, but I'm not sure we go to that level of detail. Peter asked, will a late monsoon start be reflected in a late monsoon finish, e.g. as in India?
Yep.
Peter must be one of our tropical attendees, I think.
Okay, so I think there might be two parts to that. So there was a late withdrawal of the monsoon trough from India, and it looks like a late arrival of the monsoon trough in the southern hemisphere, but that doesn't tell us much about the timing of the monsoon withdrawing from Australia next year.
I think Greg talked about it last week. I think the positive IOD almost keeps it away. That's why it stayed so long in India.
That's right. It's that really strong positive Indian Ocean dipole event that's probably been slowing the monsoon onset. But once that breaks down, it's unlikely to have an effect on rainfall or temperature patterns, or even the timing of the monsoon leaving Australia next year.
Yeah, thank you. And as we said, the wet season webinar recording is on our website at bond.gov.au/webinars. Nicole's asking us more questions about 50 degrees. She's obviously focused on the hot weather sort of stuff. She said people have been reporting there's a higher chance of Australian cities recording these high temperatures this summer. Is it true, and why?
Well, that's right. What we just saw in the outlook was there's very high chances of having warmer than usual maximums and minimum temperatures for most of Australia.
But I'm not sure how it relates to spikes and extremes. We don't have any direct data on that, do we?
Yeah, no, normally...
Warmer overall is what the outlook is for.
No, it also means that we are more likely to see extreme heat.
Okay. Thank you. From Mike South, more often than not, trees put on new growth 7 to 10 days before a rainfall event. What are they responding to? There's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at the weather end of the game than the tree, and maybe you could tell us, Mike, you might be the tree guy. Interesting question. I think you might have stumped us with that. I used to have a...
Was that a pun intended?
I used to have a farm. We know that a lot of the animals respond to changes in climate, and kangaroos stop breeding, but we haven't always found the links and why, have we? Because the trees and the emus won't tell us what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. There's a big study of the seasons just based on the sort of the conditions you see in the environment, the changes you see.
Thank you. Ben's asking, is there any indication of whether we're seeing any changes in the longer climate patterns such as the interdecadal oscillation? He must be one of our expert webinar users today. I haven't heard that term for a while.
Me either. I probably will have to look at that after the webinar and get back to Ben.
Thank you. Peter Harrison mentioned he thought both Cloncurry and Marble Bar, right, had recorded over 50 degrees. I think that's probably true, but you were looking at the extremes for each state, Catherine.
I think the Cloncurry one may have been discounted. Does that sound right, Jonathan?
That rings a bell, but I would have to check the detail. Some of the earlier temperature extremes, there are questions over some of the observations, depending on the instrumentation that was used and the sighting at the time.
Yeah.
But the ones on our website on that extreme page are the ones that have been verified by the Bureau.
Thank you.
Because I believe the Cloncurry one was in a beer crate.
Okay, thank you. We need to standardise our observations, yeah. Greg had said, do we have any information on the past accuracy of 3 to 6 months IOD projections? I think it's all built into the model, but we get certain responses depending on what the drivers are doing, right? And we have accuracy maps on our Outlook.
That's right. We have verification maps for the Outlook, so people can go and see how the model has performed for temperature and rainfall in the past.
Thank you. What else have we got, Ange?
We've got a great question here from Mark again. So Mark's asking, does high evaporation affect bushfire risk?
We're not sure, but I'm guessing the answer is yes, but that's a complete guess. Sarah said, can you forecast for groundwater recharge? I think we've already had a bash at this, and it's not really our area of expertise, right? Do we cover that in the Bureau?
No, I don't think we've got a public forecast for groundwater recharge.
Okay, yep. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for all your questions. We might go to the summary now, Jonathan.
Thanks, Claire. So, to summarise, summer 2019-20, we can expect above average temperatures across most of the country, below average rainfall for much of the country again in December, but that pattern sort of contracts to the east for summer overall. There's two dry climate influences, and that's the positive Indian Ocean dipole and the negative southern annular mode, and it's likely that they'll dissipate by midsummer. And that's sort of why we're seeing that shift in the really dry pattern across most of the country in December, but sort of contracting to the east for summer overall. We've heard that dry and warm weather is going to increase the chance of bushfires, heat waves, dust and drought, but it does mean a decreased chance of widespread flooding and tropical cyclones. Oh, and I've got to mention, the monthly and seasonal outlook maps, we update those every Thursday, so the latest maps will be available today.
I don't think there's much change in the outlook. It's similar.
Well, often there's not a big shift in the patterns at a national scale for those monthly and 3-monthly outlooks, but if you're interested in a particular area, your neighbourhood, you might find that the odds do shift a bit, and certainly the patterns can change quite dramatically for those weekly and fortnightly outlooks if people want to have a look at what they can expect.
Thank you. And for more information?
That's right. This slide, we've got a bunch of links to different information across the Bureau's website. So the climate outlooks, those rainfall and temperature maps we're looking at today, they're available from that first link. But I also mentioned we have other products there as well, like that Champ at least, if you want to know what your odds are of getting a particular amount of rainfall. The Climate and Water Outlook video is a fantastic summary that you can, if you've just got a couple of minutes and want to catch up on what has happened and what is likely to happen, I'd check that out. The seasonal stream flow forecast, we mentioned there'll be a new one of those out next week. The ENSO wrap-up is a great place to go for general guidance about what our big climate drivers are doing and what it might mean for rainfall and temperature patterns into the future. The drought statement has quite comprehensive coverage of rainfall deciles, so you can see how different areas are performing across different periods. And there's also the Know Your Weather website that you can visit and learn a lot more about the weather. And don't forget to engage with us on social media. You can drop us a line at BOM webinars. And if we didn't get to your question today, please email it in and we'll try to get onto it and get back to you directly. And you can subscribe to the e-alerts if you want some advance warning for our next webinar.
Thank you. And also we have our ENSO wrap-up every 2 weeks, which covers the changes in the IOD, and our climate outlooks go out every 2 weeks as well. So there'll be, the next one is due.
Well, the climate outlooks now the weekly and fortnightly maps we update twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. The monthly and seasonal maps we're looking at today.
The email is due out next.
So we send emails out when we release a video, which is about twice a month.
The next one's due out on about the 17th. Have I got that right?
I think so. That sounds about right.
Fantastic. So our next webinar is actually our Autumn Outlook webinar. That'll be held on Thursday, the 5th of March 2020, and has just kindly put in the link on the chat.
Absolutely. Come and register now. Get in early.
Fantastic, and bring all your questions. That was made for a great webinar. So you can access the link in the chat now, or else all those links are available on our bom.gov.au/webinars page. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. So as we've mentioned, if you have any other questions, helpdesk.climate@bom.gov.au. And a very big thank you to Catherine and Jonathan and all the people involved in putting our webinar together today. We really appreciate your time in helping us develop the content and sharing your knowledge. And particularly to our audience, thanks for all your great questions. Thanks for tuning in and joining us today. For those people who had audio problems, as long as you've registered for the webinar, we will send you the recording after the session. We hope you've enjoyed it, and if you'd like to continue the conversation, also you can use the hashtag #BOMWebinars in your LinkedIn posts. So as we mentioned earlier, the session's been recorded. We'll have the video ready for you. Finally, but most importantly, we really do value your feedback. It is our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. Once we close this webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd be grateful for you to complete that anonymously for us. So once again, many thanks to our 200 odd participants today. We thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you again. So goodbye.